You're watching from shore as your $80,000 boat disappears into the horizon, with 4 women aboard who had no permission to take it. What would you do? Call the police. That's exactly what I did. But what happened next turned my quiet lakeside community into a legal battlefield that would expose secrets, destroy friendships, and land me in the center of the most dramatic courtroom showdown of my life. My name is David Martinez, and 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd worked my entire life as a marine engineer, saved every penny, and finally bought my dream home on Lake Harrison, a beautiful waterfront property with my own private dock, the crown jewel, my 32-foot cabin cruiser, second wind, worth more than most people's cars, living in Willowbrook Estates meant dealing with an HOA. But I figured it was a small price to pay for paradise. That was before I met Karen Whitfield and her inner circle, what I came to call the HOA sisters. Karen was the HOA president, and she ruled our community like her personal kingdom. Alongside her were Margaret Chen, the treasurer, Linda Rodriguez, the secretary, and Susan Blake, whose only qualification seemed to be agreeing with Karen about everything. These 4 women controlled every aspect of our neighborhood life. They'd walk around in their matching visors, clipboards in hand, measuring grass height and documenting paint chips. But what really bothered me was how they gather at the community pool every Friday evening, drinking wine and gossiping about neighbors, like they owned the place. The first sign of trouble came 6 months after I moved in. I'd been working late shifts at the shipyard, and apparently, my grass had grown half an inch taller than HOA regulations allowed. The fine, $150. When I politely explained that I'd been working overtime to pay for the boat, Karen smiled that cold smile of hers and said, "Rules are rules, David, we can't make exceptions." But it was the boat that really caught their attention. Every weekend, I'd take second wind out for peaceful cruises, sometimes alone, sometimes with my elderly father who lived in the assisted living facility nearby. The HOA sisters would watch from the clubhouse deck, and I could see them talking, pointing, whispering, "Must be nice to have money," Margaret commented loudly one day as I was washing the boat. "Some of us actually work for a living." The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked 60-hour weeks while they spent their days enforcing petty regulations. The breaking point came on Memorial Day weekend. I planned a special trip with my father, but he'd fallen ill the night before and was hospitalized with pneumonia. Worried sick, I spent the entire weekend at his bedside, the boat sitting unused at the dock. Sunday evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, I drove home from the hospital around sunset. As I rounded the bend toward my house, I expected to see second wind tide peacefully at my dock. Instead, I saw empty water. My heart hammered in my chest. Had the boat broken loose? Had someone stolen it? I ran to the dock, checking the cleats, looking for any sign of what had happened. That's when I heard it. Laughter and music drifting across the water from about a mile out. I grabbed my binoculars and trained them on the sound. There, in the middle of the lake, was my boat. And aboard were 4 very familiar figures: Karen, Margaret, Linda, and Susan, clearly having the time of their lives. They had coolers, decorations, and what looked like a full party setup. Karen was at the helm, driving my $80,000 boat like she owned it. My hands shook as I watched them through the binoculars. Susan was dancing on the bow. Margaret was taking selfies with a bottle of champagne. Linda was lounging in my captain's chair with her feet up. And Karen was steering my boat toward the most dangerous part of the lake, near the rocky shoals where countless vessels had been damaged. I called Karen's cell phone immediately. It went straight to voicemail. Then Margaret's voicemail, Linda's voicemail, Susan's phone wasn't even listed. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small dinghy was tied to my dock. The HOA sisters had used it to get to my boat, then left it behind like they were planning to abandon it. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an emergency. This was premeditated theft. I tried calling Harbor Patrol, but they said since the women lived in the same community as me, it was probably a neighborly misunderstanding and suggested I wait for them to return. Well, they potentially destroyed my life's greatest investment. As darkness fell and they still hadn't returned, I made a decision that would change everything. I called 911 and reported my boat as stolen. I need to report a theft in progress. I told the dispatcher, my voice steady despite my racing heart. 4 individuals have taken my boat without permission and are currently operating it on Lake Harrison. Within 20 minutes, police boats with flashing lights were speeding across the water. I watched through my binoculars as the HOA sisters' party came to an abrupt halt. The music stopped, the laughter died, and 4 women who had spent years making my life miserable were now being questioned by officers while my boat bobbed in the middle of the lake. But as I watched Karen's face in the police spotlight, something in her expression told me this was far from over. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating. And I was about to learn that reporting your HOA president for boat theft is like declaring war on someone who holds all the neighborhood's secrets. The real battle was just beginning. The morning after the boat incident, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been buzzing all night, but I turned off the sound. Exhausted from the police interviews and the emotional roller coaster of getting second wind safely back to dock, most of the messages were from neighbors I barely knew, asking if it was true that I'd had the HOA board arrested. Word travels fast in a community of 200 homes, especially when police boats with flashing lights are involved. But it was the voicemail from my attorney that made my stomach drop. David, this is Jim Crawford. I need you to call me immediately. I've received a certified letter on your behalf from Whitfield and Associates regarding alleged harassment, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We need to talk now. Whitfield and Associates, Karen's husband's law firm. I called Jim back within minutes. He'd been my lawyer since I bought the house, a steady, reliable guy who usually handled simple real estate matters. The concern in his voice was unmistakable. David, they're claiming you falsely reported a crime, knowing full well that these women had permission to use your boat. They're saying you agreed to let them use it weeks ago as part of some community goodwill gesture, and that you maliciously called police to embarrass and humiliate them. That's complete fabrication, I said, my voice rising. I never gave anyone permission to use my boat, ever. I believe you. But here's the problem, they have witnesses. 3 neighbors are willing to testify that they heard you offer the boat to the HOA for community events. And David, they're suing you for $250,000 in damages. The room started spinning. $250,000. I'd worked my entire life to build what little I had. This could destroy me financially. How is that even possible? They're claiming emotional distress, public humiliation, damage to their reputations, and lost business income. Karen apparently does real estate on the side, and she's claiming this incident has damaged her professional standing. That week became a nightmare of legal documents, attorney meetings, and sleepless nights. But the worst part was the community reaction. The HOA sisters had launched a whisper campaign that painted me as an unstable neighborhood. Weaponized law enforcement against innocent women. My mailbox was vandalized twice. Someone left a dead fish on my doorstep. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who used to bring me cookies, now crossed the street to avoid me. But I refused to back down. If they wanted to fight dirty, I'd fight back with the truth. Jim, I want to countersue. I told my attorney during our third meeting that week. This is harassment, and I have proof. That's when I remembered something crucial. 6 months earlier, concerned about vandalism in the neighborhood, I'd installed a high-definition security camera system around my property. The main camera had a clear view of the dock and lake. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the footage from Memorial Day weekend, and there it was, crystal clear evidence of what really happened. The timestamp showed to 4:47 p.m. on Sunday. A small dinghy approached my dock with 4 figures aboard. Karen, Margaret, Linda, and Susan climbed onto my dock, looked around to make sure no one was watching, then boarded second wind. You could literally see Karen jimmying the cabin lock with what looked like a credit card. But the most damning part was the audio. My security system had caught their conversation. "Are you sure about this, Karen?" Susan's voice was clearly audible. "He's not here, and he'll never know. We'll have it back before dark. Besides, after all the fines we've collected from him, he owes us a little fun." Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Serves him right for thinking he's better than everyone else with that fancy boat. Just remember," Karen's voice was ice cold, "if anyone asks, we had permission. We'll say he offered it weeks ago as a community gesture. Who's going to believe him over all 4 of us?" I rewatched that segment 10 times, my anger building with each replay. This wasn't just theft. It was a calculated plan to not only steal my boat, but to destroy my credibility if they got caught. But the evidence got even better. The camera showed them returning at 9:23 p.m., long after I discovered the boat missing, and most importantly, it captured them dumping something overboard just before reaching the dock. What looked like several bottles, probably alcohol they didn't want the police to find. "Jim, you need to see this." I called my attorney immediately. "I have everything. The whole plan, recorded in HD with audio." When Jim watched the footage, his expression changed completely. "David, this isn't just boat theft anymore. This is conspiracy, breaking and entering, and attempted fraud. And if they try to commit perjury in court based on their fabricated story, what does that mean? It means we're not just defending against their lawsuit anymore. We're going on the offensive. I'm filing criminal charges against all 4 of them, and we're countersuing for harassment, defamation, and malicious prosecution." That night, I felt hope for the first time in weeks, but I also felt something else, a cold determination. The HOA sisters had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. They'd spent years bullying people with their petty power plays, but they'd finally crossed someone who wouldn't be intimidated. As I watched the security footage one more time, Karen's recorded words echoing in my head, I knew this case would expose more than just a boat theft. It would reveal the corrupt core of our HOA's leadership. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be explosive. The Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with an unusual energy that Tuesday morning in October. Word of the HOA boat theft trial had spread throughout Lake Harrison and beyond. Local news crews had set up outside, and the gallery was packed with neighbors, community members, and curious onlookers. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Jim Crawford, trying to steady my nerves. Across the aisle, Karen Whitfield commanded her team of 3 attorneys from her husband's firm, looking confident and composed in her navy blue power suit. Margaret, Linda, and Susan flanked her, all dressed identically in what I could only assume was a calculated strategy to appear unified and respectable. Judge Patricia Hernandez entered, and the courtroom fell silent. She was known for running a tight ship and having little patience for frivolous cases. After 6 months of depositions, motions, and legal maneuvering, we were finally here. This case presents an interesting question. Judge Hernandez began, adjusting her reading glasses. Did the defendants have permission to use the plaintiff's boat, as they claim? Or was this unauthorized taking of property, as Mr. Martinez alleges? We'll hear opening statements first. Karen's lead attorney, Richard Stones, stood first. He was polished, expensive, and intimidating, everything you'd expect from a high-end law firm. Your Honor, this case is about a vindictive neighbor who weaponized law enforcement against for respected community volunteers. These women believed in good faith that they had Mr. Martinez's permission to use his boat for community appreciation event when a simple misunderstanding occurred. Rather than handle it neighborly fashion, Mr. Martinez maliciously called police, causing my clients profound embarrassment and damage to their reputations. He painted a picture of me as an antisocial boat owner who grudgingly agreed to let the HOA use my vessel, then changed his mind out of spite. 3 neighbors would testify they'd heard me agree to the arrangement, he claimed. When Jim stood to present our opening statement, the courtroom's energy shifted. Your Honor, this case is indeed about weaponizing authority, but not by my client. The defendants systematically abused their HOA positions to harass Mr. Martinez with excessive fines and regulations. When that wasn't enough to satisfy their vendetta, they escalated to outright theft, and when they were caught, they concocted an elaborate lie, recruiting false witnesses to cover their crimes. The first day of testimony was a parade of character witnesses for both sides. Karen's team presented 3 neighbors who claimed I'd offered the boat to the HOA during various community meetings. Their testimony was suspiciously similar, almost rehearsed. But when Jim cross-examined them, cracks began to show. Mrs. Thompson, you testified that Mr. Martinez offered his boat during the April HOA meeting. Are you certain about the date? Yes, absolutely. April 15th. Jim smiled. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the official HOA meeting minutes from April 15th, which show that Mr. Martinez was not in attendance. He was in Pittsburgh for his father's surgery. As evidenced by these hospital records and airline receipts, Mrs. Thompson's face went pale. The other witnesses suddenly became less certain about dates and details. The second day brought the security footage. The courtroom was dead silent as the large screen displayed crystal clear video of the 4 defendants boarding my boat. Karen's confident demeanor cracked as her own voice filled the courtroom. He owes us a little fun. If anyone asks, we had permission. When the prosecution played Margaret's recorded laugh and comment about me thinking I was better than everyone else, several jurors visibly reacted. This wasn't looking like innocent community volunteers anymore. But the real bombshell came during Karen's testimony on day 3. Under oath, she maintained their fabricated story about having permission. Mr. Martinez clearly told us we could use his boat for HOA events. He said it would be his contribution to community spirit. Jim's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Whitfield, you're aware that lying under oath is perjury, correct? Of course. And you're testifying under oath that Mr. Martinez gave you permission, yes? So when you were recorded on his security system saying if anyone asks, we had permission, You were referring to permission he'd already given you. Karen hesitated for the first time. That was taken out of context. Out of context. Let's listen again. Jim played the audio once more. You also said he'll never know and that you needed to have the boat back before dark. Why would you need to hide using a boat you had permission to use? We didn't want to bother him unnecessarily. By jimmying the lock on his cabin, is that also part of not bothering him? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Hernandez called for order. But Jim wasn't finished. He produced a manila envelope I'd never seen before. Mrs. Whitfield, are you familiar with these? He showed her a stack of documents. These are copies of all the fines your HOA board issued to Mr. Martinez over 18 months. 47 violations totaling $3,200, all for infractions like grass height variations of less than 1 inch and mailbox paint chips smaller than a quarter. Karen's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The pattern of harassment was clear. The final surprise came when Jim called Margaret Chen to the stand as a hostile witness. Under pressure, she broke. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Karen said we could just borrow it and no one would know. She said David deserved it after all the trouble he'd caused the HOA. We never meant for it to go this far. Karen's face went white as her co-conspirator crumbled on the witness stand. She made us practice what to say if we got caught. The story about permission, that was all Karen's idea. We just went along with it. As Margaret continued her confession, detailing how Karen had orchestrated both the theft and the cover-up, I watched the HOA president's carefully constructed facade finally collapse. But something in Karen's eyes told me she had one more card to play. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. In complex civil cases, quick deliberations usually mean one side presented an overwhelmingly stronger case. Based on the evidence we'd presented and Margaret's devastating testimony, I was cautiously optimistic. Judge Hernandez called us back into session at 3:30 p.m. on Friday. The courthouse gallery was packed again. Our small-town drummer had become the most entertaining show in Riverside County. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Hernandez asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial, stood up. We have, Your Honor, in the matter of Martinez versus Whitfield, Chen, Rodriguez, and Blake. How do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiff, David Martinez, on all counts. The gallery erupted. I felt Jim's hand clap my shoulder as relief flooded through me. But the foreman wasn't finished. We award Mr. Martinez $85,000 in damages, and we recommend that the district attorney's office pursue criminal charges for theft, conspiracy, breaking and entering, and perjury. Karen's face was stone, but I could see her hands trembling. Her expensive legal team was already shuffling papers, preparing for damage control. Judge Hernandez thanked the jury and scheduled a hearing for the following week to address the criminal referral. As people filed out of the courtroom, I thought, my nightmare was finally over. I was wrong. That evening, as Jim and I celebrated with dinner at a local restaurant, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Riverside County Sheriff. Mr. Martinez, this is Detective Sarah Walsh. We need to speak with you immediately about some new evidence in your case. My stomach dropped. What kind of evidence? We'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to the station? Jim and I exchanged worried looks. 20 minutes later, we sat in a small conference room at the sheriff's station, facing Detective Walsh and a woman I didn't recognize, Mr. Martinez. This is Agent Rebecca Park from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating your HOA for the past 8 months. FBI, my head spun. I don't understand. Agent Park opened a thick file. Your boat theft case opened a much larger can of worms. When we subpoenaed the HOA's financial records as part of the criminal investigation, we discovered systematic embezzlement spanning 3 years. Karen Whitfield and her associates have stolen over $400,000 from homeowner fees, community funds, and special assessments. The room felt like it was tilting. $400,000. The boat theft was just the tip of the iceberg, Detective Walsh continued. We believe Mrs. Whitfield was getting desperate. The HOA's annual audit was scheduled for June, and she knew the missing money would be discovered. She needed a distraction, something to discredit you specifically. Why me specifically? Agent Park leaned forward. Because 3 months ago, you submitted a formal complaint to the county about excessive HOA fines. That complaint triggered a preliminary investigation into the board's practices. Karen knew that if anyone was going to uncover her embezzlement scheme, it would be you. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The escalating fines, the constant harassment, the boat theft. It wasn't just petty neighborhood drama. I'd unknowingly stumbled onto a massive fraud scheme. And Karen was trying to destroy my credibility before I could expose her. The boat theft was meant to accomplish 2 things, Agent Park explained. First, it would give them a reason to paint you as an unhinged, vindictive neighbor whose complaints couldn't be trusted. Second, the lawsuit was designed to financially ruin you, so you couldn't afford to continue challenging them. But it backfired spectacularly. Detective Walsh added, your security footage didn't just prove the theft, it led us to subpoena all communications between the board members. That's when we found evidence of the embezzlement. Agent Park showed me printouts of text messages between the HOA sisters. The messages detailed fake invoices for landscaping work that was never performed, contractor payments that went directly into Karen's personal accounts, and community event funds that paid for Karen's family vacations. We estimate each homeowner in Willowbrook Estates has been overcharged approximately $2,000 over 3 years to cover the missing money, Agent Park said. My neighbors hadn't just been victims of Karen's vindictive leadership, they'd been unknowingly funding her theft through inflated fees and bogus fines. What happens now? Jim asked. Federal charges will be filed next week. Grand larceny, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. We're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison for the ringleaders. As we left the police station, my phone started buzzing with calls from neighbors. Word was already spreading through the community. The same neighbors who'd avoided me after the boat incident were now calling to apologize and ask questions about the embezzlement. Mrs. Patterson was waiting on my doorstep when I got home, holding a plate of cookies and fighting back tears. David, I'm so sorry, she said. We all thought we didn't understand what was really happening. Over the next weeks, as the FBI investigation became public, the full scope of Karen's corruption emerged. The community pool renovation that was too expensive to complete, the money had paid for Karen's kitchen remodel, the emergency assessment for road repairs that never happened, it funded Margaret's son's college tuition. 6 months later, I stood on my dock watching the sunrise over Lake Harrison. Second wind bobbed peacefully at her mooring, and my father, recovered from his pneumonia, was visiting for the weekend. The HOA sisters were awaiting trial in federal custody. A new transparent HOA board had been elected, and our community was healing. The $85,000 judgment, combined with the federal restitution, had more than compensated me for the nightmare. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a handwritten letter from Margaret Chen in federal detention. David, I know you'll probably never forgive us, but I need you to know, you saved our community. If you hadn't fought back, Karen would have stolen everything. Your courage gave the rest of us courage too. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be silenced. And sometimes, standing up to a bully reveals that they're not just mean, they're criminals. If you're facing HOA harassment or suspect financial irregularities in your community, don't stay silent. Document everything. Seek legal counsel. And remember, the truth has a way of surfacing when you're brave enough to die for it. Subscribe for more true crime stories of ordinary people who refuse to back down. Your next video might feature the justice story happening in your own neighborhood.